talk to you guys today about something that is true, but can be difficult to understand why. For me, life was relatively easy growing up. I mean, I had trouble like everybody else, and I had things that I struggled with, and some scars and stuff from everything like everybody else does growing up. But I had it pretty easy. We had air conditioning. I never had to worry about going hungry. I had family that loved me. We had a Nintendo. Things were good. But there was this issue that I had, that I knew Jesus, and I really desired to be close to him, and I felt like I was close to him most of the time. But other times, it seemed like I was okay without him being that close. One week we went to D.C. with my youth group, and we did some work there. We painted some stairwells. We helped feed some people. We did things like that at this organization that was helping downtown. And I met a woman there who I hadn't met someone like that before that I can remember. She was separated from her kids. She had nowhere to live. She had no job at the moment, but she was trying hard to find one. That's why she was there. And she needed medication that she couldn't afford. And yet for all of the things that were going wrong in her life, all of the things that she was lacking that I had, there was a joy in her that I hadn't had. There was a trust in Jesus and a closeness with him that she had that I was honestly a little bit jealous of. And I wondered when I left, how come she can be going through such deep water in her life and still feel so close to Jesus? How come other people go through things like this and they lose their faith, but for her it drew her closer to him? What is the difference? Why is that happening in her life? And why is it true that in the middle of these struggles, Jesus can be so near? Because that is what I wanted to have when the time came for me to have those kinds of experiences. The Apostle Paul knew the answer to this, not because it was book knowledge that he went and looked up and learned that way, but because that was what his life had experienced. There were things in his life that were broken and hard, struggles that he went to, literal sufferings, literal evil that he had to go through on a surprisingly regular basis. In the book of 2 Corinthians, he's talking to them there about these things that he has suffered. And I just want to share part of the list that he shares. And as you think about this, think about at what point in this list would you have said, you know what, I'm ready to give up? At what point in this list would you have said, you know what, I don't know if God is really with me, if these are the things that I'm going through? This is what he says. He says, I have worked much harder, been in prison more frequently, been flogged more severely, and been exposed to death again and again. 5 times I received from the Jews the 40 lashes minus 1. Just think about the scars on his back from these whippings. 3 times I was beaten by rods. Once I was stoned. 3 times I was shipwrecked. I spent a night and day in the open sea. I have been constantly on the move. I have been in danger from rivers, in danger from bandits, in danger from my own countrymen, in danger from Gentiles, in danger in the city and in the country, in danger at sea, and in danger from false brothers. I have labored and toiled and have gone without sleep. I have known hunger and thirst and gone without food. I have been cold and naked. Besides everything else, I face daily the pressure of my concern for all the churches. Here's a list of everything he's gone through. And he's not complaining about these things because to him, he is willing to go through all of these things and more because he has met Jesus. And Jesus has been with him in the midst of all of these things. He had met Jesus when he had no business meeting him. He met Jesus when Jesus was supposed to be dead. He believed him to be dead, and he was going around actively persecuting, killing, and imprisoning the people that followed Jesus. And yet, in the midst of that place he was at in his life, Jesus came to him and sought him out, not just to give him the truth, but to give him life and forgiveness and to set him free from his sins and set him free from the things that was holding him back. That was who he was willing to go through these things for. And he'd also experienced incredible visions, experiences of God's presence in his life since then. Experiences where he literally feels like he has been to heaven and back. Things that he can't put into words. Things that he could never express. He has experienced. And yet there's still something in his life that he's struggling with. Something that is so big that he literally calls it a thorn in his flesh, a messenger from Satan. Now, this is a guy who just went through all of those things we just read and wasn't complaining about them. But this thing is so serious that he considers it a messenger from Satan that he cannot get rid of. He cannot shake. He never says exactly what it is, and I'm glad for that. Because it allows us to put our thorn in the flesh, our messenger from Satan, in his place. So I want you to do that right now. What is the thing that you are struggling with right now, that you are desperate to be out of, desperate to be rid of? It can come in all kinds of different things. It can be a physical thing. It could be a weight thing that you can't get rid of, a disease that you're fighting, a fatigue that you can't shake. It could be anything like that. It could be an emotional thing. It could be thoughts that you have in your mind that you know aren't true but define your life right now. It could be relationship stuff, burdens you have for family and friends, brokenness you have by the way things have gone between you and people you were supposed to love and trust. Whatever it is, what is that struggle that you wish you were out of, you are desperate to be free from? For Paul, this thorn in the flesh was something that he wanted God to deal with because he couldn't deal with it. And he said, 3 times I pleaded with the Lord to take it away from me. But he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore I will boast all the more gladly about my weaknesses, so that Christ's power may rest on me. You see, God answered his prayer, but it wasn't how he expected it to answer. I love how the New Living Translation puts it. They say, each time God said, my grace is all you need. It's not that you need to get rid of these things. My grace will be with you in it and see you through it. For my power works best in weakness. This is God's sufficient grace. A grace that will be there for all of us who are going through these dark struggles, through these deep water that we don't know how to get through on our own. General Superintendent David Busick puts it this way. Sufficient grace is the Lord's way of saying, when you come to the end of your human strength, I will give you my supernatural strength. When your energy runs out, my energy will be made alive in you. When you cannot go any farther, I will pick you up and carry you. Rest in my arms for a while. An important part of sufficient grace, I think one of the reasons why we sometimes struggle with this on deciding whether to get closer to Jesus or to turn away, is that sufficient grace is only experienced when we need it. You can't bank it for later necessarily. Now, Megan is great at packing for our vacations. When we get ready to go someplace, she starts like a week or 2 out getting everything ready because she wants to be prepared for all eventualities. She doesn't want us to be missing something that we might need along the way. She wants us to be prepared for what's coming. And when she feels prepared, then we're packed and we're ready to go. And it has come in handy over the years. There are times when we have needed exactly what she packed that I never would have thought to bring. And if you are like that, if you're the kind of person that likes to have everything lined up and in place before you want to step forward, well, then this sufficient grace can be a hard thing for you. Because you kind of have to trust that it's going to be there before you have it. In life and in this role that I have, I get to walk with a lot of people. And sometimes I'm right there with them celebrating the joys of their life, and then a lot of times I'm with them in some of the darkest struggles that they're going through. And it's hard to see them in those places. It's especially hard for me when I'm dealing with people who are struggling with things that are going on with their children, because I know how much I care for and love my kids and what it would be like to experience that. And I've often sat there afterwards and gone, if I was in their shoes, I don't think I have the strength to do what they're having to do. I don't think I could make it through what they're going through. Have you ever been in a place like that where you've seen what somebody else is struggling with and you're like, you know what, I don't have what it takes to get through that. I don't have what I need to make it through those places. Well, it's true. You do not have what you need to get through that place in that moment. But if you ever were there, you would. Because God's grace shows up when you need it, not before. The key to getting closer to Him, instead of turning away from Him, is to trust Him. To trust that when you need God, He will be there. When you need His grace, it will show up. When you need His presence, He will show up. When you need His power, it will be there. That you have to trust that God will be there when those moments come that you need Him to give you exactly what you need. God tried to teach the Israelites this long ago. After they were freed from Egypt, they wandered around in the desert for a while, partly because God needed to teach them how to live as free people, how to live as His people, not just as slaves in someone else's country. But part of the problem about being in the desert when you had a lot of people around is there's not a lot of food to go around, and starvation was a real issue that they had to deal with while they were out there. And so in the desert, God's sufficient grace came to them to give them just what they needed. Every morning they could go out of their tents, and there on the ground, God provided daily bread. They called it manna. It's described almost as if Dunkin' Donuts kind of showed up and just covered the ground with donuts every morning for them to go and get what they needed. And they could turn it into bread, they could bake it into tortillas, they could do whatever they needed to with that stuff for that day. But there was one requirement that they had to follow. They could only take what they needed for their family for that day. You see, if you were worried that God wouldn't show up tomorrow with the same supply that He showed up with today, you might be tempted to take it and put it in some Tupperware and go slide it in the fridge so that it would be there for tomorrow, so that tomorrow when He didn't show up, you'd still have what you needed. You'd still have the grace available to you, the bread available to you. But here's the thing about it. Maybe some of you have had this experience. You've done that. I'm going to save this. You put it in the Tupperware, you stick it in the fridge, and then you forget about it. And 4, 5, 6 months later, you pull it out, and what used to be the leftover part of a sandwich is now a fuzzy orange, green thing that you can't even identify anymore. It has gone completely bad. And to try and eat this would actually make you sick. Well, the same thing happens with this manna. If you tried to save it for the next day, when you got up, you would have this fuzzy, wormy, rotten, spoiled thing. It didn't do you any good. You see, God wanted you to trust that what He gave you today, which was exactly what you need, He'd be able to do again tomorrow. You had to believe that He would provide today, and He would provide tomorrow and the next day. You had to know, to experience for yourself, that God's mercies were new every morning. And if you could believe that and trust it, then God's grace would be sufficient to get you through every day in the wilderness. No matter what you're facing, God's loving grace is enough. I don't say that lightly. I understand what people go through. And I'm not saying that it's enough to take it away or to make it disappear. But it is good news that God's grace is enough wherever you are, whatever you're going through. His grace shows up and changes things. Remember the struggle that you're in that I asked you to think about earlier? I know, because I know myself, that something came to mind, the thing you were desperate to get out of, to get through. You are too weak to get out of it on your own, or you would have by now. But God's grace is all you need. He's not holding it back from you. Sometimes it might feel that way, but He is not holding it back from you. There's a song, it says this, and it's true. His love never fails. It never gives up. It never runs out. It's kind of like the footprints in the sand poem that when I was a kid I thought was really cheesy and I didn't want to read or listen to very much. But as I've gotten older, I've come to experience the truth of what it says. In this poem, there's a guy who's walking along the beach, and as he looks back, he notices that this is kind of his life. And there's two sets of footprints going down the beach through his life. And one set is his, and one set is Jesus. And he can look back and see the places that things have gone. And he looks back and he notices that in the really hard parts, the struggling parts, the deep water parts, there's only one set of footprints. And it bugs him. And so he confronts Jesus about this. And he says, Lord, you told me when I decided to follow you, you would walk and talk with me all the way. But I'm aware that during the most troublesome times of my life, there's only one set of footprints. I just don't understand. Why, when I need you most, you leave me? He whispered, my precious child, I love you. I will never leave you, never ever, during your trials and testings. When you saw only one set of footprints, it was then that I carried you. God doesn't disappear when things are hard. God doesn't go away and abandon you when things are difficult. He doesn't let you go when the struggle comes. He is with you. Do you trust that He's there? Do you trust that His grace is enough? Have you ever experienced this? I should be crushed by what I'm going through, but I feel like I'm being carried. The one set of footprints in the sand. Megan and I have a friend from college who we haven't seen in a long time. We just catch up a little bit here and there on Facebook. But she, 4 years ago about now, was going through one of the hardest times in her life. Her personal life was not where she wanted it to be and was crumbling apart. Trying to raise kids as she's going through a marriage that's breaking down. She'd recently come back from the mission field where she felt was God's call on her life, and that was a struggle. And she was sick and didn't know why. Sick to the point of being able to work and function was breaking down. She found out she had stage 4 colon cancer. So she goes through the chemo, she goes through some trials, some surgery, she goes through all these things, and they came back and said, look, we're going to have to keep doing this probably for the rest of your life. However long that ends up being. We may have moments of months where we get you to the place where you're cancer-free, but it's just going to keep coming back in your life. Talk about a messenger from Satan, right? But she's been fighting through it with the help of God. She credits a lot of her ability to function and still be a part of her kid's life and do the things that she's able to do, have a job now and all this stuff, to the care she's received from her church family. Family, you don't realize the sufficient grace of God often comes through Jesus with skin on, which is you, His hands and feet in this world. Don't ever underplay the significance you might have in someone's life that way. But recently, she's getting to the end of one of these rounds of radiation and everything, and hoping to have a moment of time where she is cancer-free here pretty soon, and her health will be good for that time, energy higher and everything like that. And she says, though, in the midst of all of this, she said, I told God today, I just don't want to play the how can I outsmart, outwit, outlive cancer game anymore. She was having a rough morning that day, and so she posted this in the morning and went through her day, and then comes back to give an update that night. And she says, thank you. To God and to those who cared, thank you. Because of those who had prayed, she was getting better. Because of God's grace, there was a sense of peace that grew throughout the day that it will be okay. That is the sufficient grace of God. The same God whose grace carried her for years to this place is the same God who met her and lifted her that day, is the same God who will be there with her tomorrow and the next day and the next day to get her through the things that she is going through. It's the same God who can do that for you. What is the thorn in your flesh? What is the struggle that you were desperate to get out from under? And do you trust that God's grace is sufficient to see you through it? This is what he says to us all. My grace is sufficient for you. My grace is all you need. For my power is made perfect in weakness. What you need from God will be there exactly when you need it. You can trust him. Let's pray. Lord, I pray that as we think about the things that we're going through that could easily tear us away from you, I pray that you will use your grace to help turn us closer to you in those moments. Not that we think that you've caused any evil in our life. We know you are not the source of evil, but that you are a God who redeems evil, who will use anything to bring us closer to you and to bring us home and to help us become who you've called us to be, and that you will take anything. You don't want to waste any pain, and that you meet us in the midst of it because you know what pain and suffering is like. Lord, I trust that you will give us exactly what we need. I trust you will give me exactly what I need, that your grace is all I need, that it is sufficient for whatever it is that I'm going through today. And it will be there for me tomorrow, whatever it is I need to get through what happens the next day. And Lord, I pray for those of us that are in the midst of a struggle right now. It could be for whatever reason we haven't trusted you, we haven't looked for you, we haven't realized that your grace is ready for us right now to give us today what we need. And I pray that we would not just know that, but we would begin to experience that some today, that you would lift us up and carry us, that we could rest in your arms as we face the things that we're facing. Lord, your love is enough, and we need you like we've never needed anything in our lives. Help us in the midst of whatever it is that we are suffering through, and draw us ever closer to your healing and sustaining and sufficient presence. We love you. Thank you for loving us. We pray these things in your Son's name. Amen.